Headlights carve white ribbons through the American night. Counties blur into counties. Exits promise coffee, diesel, and dreams. A nation moves at 70 and calls it normal. Beneath the tires lies a law with a date and a tax measured in cents. In 1956, the United States decided to pour concrete into a map. A network with no front door and 1,000 back doors to everywhere. It needed money that could be trusted as much as steel, and a promise small enough to swallow but big enough to build. The promise was not a bond floated to posterity. It was a nickel at the pump that began as 3 cents, a user fee that felt like a receipt, not a lecture. Paid in the whiff of gasoline and the click of a counter. Dwight Eisenhower knew roads as a soldier knows weather. In 1919, he crawled with an army convoy from Washington to San Francisco. 62 days of stuck trucks and broken bridges. He remembered every mile like a warning written in mud. In Europe, he saw another lesson poured in concrete, the German Autobahn, fast lanes that ignored hills and towns. Mobile prit à chaîne à sa langage. He brought the memory home and turned it into policy. America, after the war, was a nation of keys and carports, Buicks in driveways, baby seats and picnic coolers. Farm to small town, gasket to assembly line, the engine of the middle class needed a road to breathe. There had been roads, of course, and laws to fund them, federal aid in the teens, turnpikes in the 30s, tall dreams in the 40s. But the country was a patchwork, slow where it should be quick, dangerous where it should be safe, exhausting where it should be routine. The Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 did not just pick routes. It picked a financing soul and gave it a vault, the Highway Trust Fund, a lockbox with a spigot, fed by pennies from every gallon to build a nation's bones. 3 cents per gallon on gasoline, up from 1. Plus le vion diesel, Strux Trevia Exels. Dedicated by statute to one purpose the public could see, no detours to pet projects, no borrowing from later to pay for now. It was born pay as you go with guardrails and a clock. Obligations tied to forecast revenues, a schedule married to cash. States would build, Washington would reimburse. 90% federal, 10% state on the interstate lanes. Bureau of Public Roads turned ideas into standards, controlled access, medians. Shoulders that forgive mistake, maximum grades, minimum radis, breed the future. Design as quiet law, safety as geometry, endurance as a specification. An interstate shield became a passport without ink. Odd numbers north-south, even numbers east-west, 2 digits for long spines, 3 for city loops. Nomenclature as choreography for a continent. Bulldozers wrote new sentences across the land, cut and fill, slab and rebar, beams with names and mileposts like beads. Farm fields found ramps, small towns found bypasses, and cities learned what a trench with traffic does to a neighborhood. Cement mixers spun, while surveyors argued with bedrock. Eminent domain spoke in formal letters and folded maps. People moved because the line moved, not because they wanted to. Wounds would open in later decades with names and marshes. Trucking inhaled the future through a chrome grill. Teamsters grew. Railroads learned to share the freight. Warehouses moved to where ramps met loops. Logistics became a verb and a profit center. Suburbs inflated like white balloons tied to exits. Mortgage followed cul-de-sacs. Malls replaced depots. Fast food. Motel big box the grammar of asphalt. A landscape designed by speed and parking stalls. Economists measured multiply als mile job speerland mile. Afraid of justice. Prices shaved thin by efficiency no one could touch, but everyone could buy. But concrete coughs when it enters a city, interstates slashed through neighborhoods with little paperwork and less mercy. Black and brown blocks bore the brunt of routes chosen by maps drawn downtown. The ribbon of mobility became a border you could not cross in a single stride. Urban renewal bought houses at appraised values that ignored futures. Front porches turned to shoulder, corner stores turned to on-ramps. Protest learned to shout "Stop the road," and sometimes it worked, a young environmental law close behind. By the late 60s, the highway revolt had a vocabulary and an archive. Greenwich Village saved itself, Baltimore rerouted, San Francisco said no. The 1966 creation of the Department of Transportation built a new referee. NEPA in 1970 required impact statements, sunlight for bulldozers. Smog poured a bill into Los Angeles and Houston skies. Clean Air Act. Standards asked highways to think about lungs. Fuel economy arrived with the oil embargo like a stern uncle, and traffic the American plague grew where prosperity did. Money does not keep the same value once it leaves the page. The 3 cents that built America fell under inflation's boot. Pennies multiplied in gallons but evaporated in bids, and bridges asked for repairs in a language called rust. In 1982 the tax rose, a nickel more per gallon, and something new appeared in the ledger. A mass transit account, a slice of the fuel stream for buses and trains. Geometry's revenge for cities where lanes could not grow. Rio 600 este em 1991 Flanagan. TEA 21, safe, acronyms paved like shoulders. The system aged into a spreadsheet with potholes. In 1993, the tax reached 18.4 then slept for decades. Fuel efficiency climbed and gallons per mile fell. The trust fund's diet tightened. While costs 8 seconds in steel, Congress poured general funds to keep projects from starving. Transfers arises 2008-2009. 2010 bailouts for a bucket that once filled itself. Electric vehicles smiled at the pump and paid nothing to the pot. The user fee creed met a battery and learned humility. States improvised with their own cents and bonds. Tolls sprouted on new lanes and old bridges. Public-private partnerships drew spreadsheets longer than ramps. Value capture and congestion pricing became dinner table arguments. Yet, for all the detours and repairs, the original plot stands. A dedicated stream changed behavior in 50 capitals. Projects penciled because cash had a home address. Trust is a bond you cannot sell, but you can spend every day. Imagine a truck of lettuce in the Rio Grande Valley. The trust fund pays the slab under it from farm to freezer case. Imagine a nurse crossing a river in January before dawn. A bridge built long ago still cashing sent receipts from the night shift. Defense did not forget why it cared. Interstate segments double as runways in a plan no one announces. Evacuation maps trust shoulders and cloverleafs. Resilience counts axle by axle when storm names arrive. Not every mile aged gracefully. Some curves were cruel, some embankments slid, some bridges sagged. Design lessons accumulated like orange barrels in spring. Work zones taught patience or tried. Equity knocked again with new questions. Who got displaced when lanes grew? Who breathes the exhaust? Who waits for a bus under a freeway shadow, and who lives far because the mortgage wanted a quart of gasoline each day. In 2021, a new law crossed the desk with a 50-state accent. A bipartisan inflection, a wave of general funds into old bones. Bridges of consequence earned grants with names the interstate turned toward repair as a form of progress. Tomorrow whispers about per mile fees instead of per gallon, about tires that whisper instead of engines that shout, about jammed corridors priced for time instead of patience, about equity baked into maps before the bulldozers warm up. But the soul of the fund is older than any acronym. User pays, user benefits. A circle that convinces skeptics, small coins into big arcs, a tax that felt like a purchase because the receipt was underfoot. Eisenhower's pen did not sign a road. It signed a relationship between a gallon and a goal, between a family's errand and a country's logistics, between a highway patrolman's radio and the economy's pulse. Ask a trucker in Nebraska about mile markers and weather. Ask a grocer in Queens about deliveries at dawn. Ask a teacher in Phoenix about a commute that used to be to roads and a prayer. You will hear the fund without hearing its name. Ask an urban planner in New Orleans about ramps built where homes were warm. Ask a community in Syracuse about a viaduct that sliced a zip code. Ask a child in Boyle Heights what it's like to play beneath a constant tide. You will hear a bill the fund, never itemized but now must pay. The Genu of 1956 was not perfection. It was the courage to match a revenue stream to a public vision, to keep the promise stable enough to pour into forms, and to let that stability compound into routines that feel like birthrights. The cost of 1956 was not forgivable by nostalgia. Vieux franc, acity linéaire drawn with thicker ink. A maintenance bill that inflation loves more than voters do. The interstate shield is not a destination. It is a sentence you finish with an exit. The trust fund is not magic. It is a fountain you maintain or watch run brown. Remember how tiny the original lever was, 3 cents breathed into a pump handle, a policy you could hold without both hands, a country moved by the weight of loose change. Remember how large the outcome was, a continental promise you can drive without a passport. A supply chain that brings strawberries on a Tuesday in snow, a map that teaches kids the names of distances. When the ledger argues about what to tax and how to trust, when batteries complicate the creed of gallons, when bridges beg for steel with new rules for weather, remember the recipe: dedication, visibility, fairness, and time. Walk out on a pedestrian bridge over 8 lanes at dusk. Watch headlights and taillights argue softly about direction. Listen to a nation commuting to itself. And feel the weight of a penny humming into concrete. We still live inside a sentence Eisenhower began. We edit it in hearings. We annotate it in asphalt. We correct it for grammar that forgot people as often as it remembered freight. We keep writing because the road keeps going. The Highway Trust Fund built more than lanes. It built a habit of believing that pennies can hold a country together. Tatas mal, on by very big promise, and that keeping the promise is how you keep a nation from fraying at the edges. When the next vote asks you what a gallon should fund, ask whether the receipt still matches the road you drive. Ask whether the map includes the people who live under it. Ask whether trust is in the title because it is in the practice. Headlights still carve white ribbons through the American night. Exits still promise coffee, diesel, and dreams. We still more at 7 call it normal, because law in 1956 turned sense into a highway you can hear with your eyes closed. If this story gave you a new way to see history, subscribe.